Thank you for joining us. My name is Carrie Smith, and on behalf of Cumulus Networks, I'd like to welcome you to Simplifying Network Automation with Ansible and Cumulus Linux. Presenting today will be Michael DeHaan, CTO and co-founder at Ansible. He's also creator of Python-powered data center automation projects such as Ansible. We also have Meena Shankaran of Cumulus Networks, who heads all of the ecosystem software and solutions. She has extensive depth and expertise in the data center space, combined with a business and technical acumen. As Cumulus Networks brings additional joint solutions with the ecosystems to market, today we'd like to dive into some of the benefits of a combined software solution with Ansible and Cumulus Linux. The webinar will be about 45 minutes. We will answer a few questions from the participants at the end if time permits. For those of you interested, you have the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar by using the window marked Questions. Simply type in your questions and click Send. We'll make every effort to answer your questions during the webinar. If we are unable to answer your questions during the webinar, please check our blog, cumulusnetworks.com/blog, and we will have your questions and answers posted. You can also tweet us your questions, and our Twitter handle is @CumulusNetworks. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Michael and Meena.
All right, yeah, thank you very much. My name is Michael DeHaan. I'm the CTO at Ansible. We're an IT automation software company, and we're going to be going into a little bit about how we manage classical IT, but also why that makes it really, really nice to manage with Cumulus and how easy Cumulus is to manage. Before I get started, we have a quick question for you. We just wanted to know if network automation was a priority in your budget this year. If you can weigh in with the controls on your screen, and I'll give a few people a few time to answer that question. Network automation is definitely a very growing area in the DevOps space right now. A lot of people are trying to use tools typically used to manage servers, to manage networking, and a lot of that is because they want to manage more than one machine at a time and roll out changes faster to all their machines. And Cumulus, we believe, has a really, really nice solution for that, especially when it works with Ansible. And we'll be going into some detail into how that works. So thanks, everyone. Let's go ahead and get things rolling. So what is Ansible? Ansible is an open source IT automation tool. Typically, the phrase infrastructure as code comes up, but Ansible really isn't about writing code. It's about making simple lists of things that should be true about your infrastructure and using a program to make sure that those things are true. Ansible is one of the top 5 projects on GitHub last year for a number of people contributing to the project. And so far, I think the slides are even a little bit out of date. We've had like 850 people that have added code to the Ansible project. That's a record high for any IT automation tool in GitHub. It's been remarkable, especially for a project that's only a couple years old. And additionally, over 7,500 people have started the project. Very high number of GitHub forks, so we're in the top 100 projects in GitHub there, and I think the top 6 of Python projects, and millions of downloads. So how did Ansible get started? So I've been involved in IT automation software for a long time. Most started out at IBM and doing a lot of storage management software, but got to be working at Red Hat and their emerging technologies group, which was a fantastic experience, and built a tool there called Cobbler. And Cobbler is used to roll out bare metal data center configurations and manage DHCP and DNS and PXE and all these kind of things. And while I was there, I was kind of watching the configuration management landscape evolve. I think a lot of people know some of the other competing tools in this space, but CF Engine was moving between version 2 and 3 at the time. Puppet was becoming popular. Chef had just started emerging. And because of the natural relationship between bare metal provisioning and configuration management, I got to know a lot of those users very closely. Long story short, I was never really too happy with any of those toolings, and I really wanted to try to unify the way that we automated infrastructure. So it was very common that someone would use one tool for configuration management, a completely different tool for application deployment, something else to manage their cloud instances, and yet something else to kind of orchestrate all the flowcharts and actions and all the things that happen to combine moving from nothing into something, and how I do upgrades and there wasn't really a tool that addressed, multi-tier configuration, if you think about web servers and database servers and obviously the network, and was able to address those very complicated sort of workflows and make all that push button. So I think everyone's kind of familiar with the feeling of having 5 or 6 people locked in a conference room for 5 hours to do a manual release, and I wanted to make this thing a thing of the past. So Ansible started about 2 years ago, and 2.5, almost 3 maybe by now, and grew really, really quickly, and we formed a company around it, which I'll get into. But I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the users and use cases before we get into some of the specifics, which Mina will definitely go into as well. So Ansible is used from a wide number of different kinds of users, from very large companies down to mid-sized and small startups. One of them is obviously Cumulus Networks. So Cumulus uses Ansible internally to help reproduce some environments and configure their systems, but it also can be used by customers. And we have users like Twitter that are using things to manage all of their systems and automate repeated systems administration tasks. If you were to go to nasa.gov right now, the homepage of NASA is deployed by Ansible. And we also have users like Fedora. So Fedora is the upstream for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and all their infrastructure is Ansible powered. VeriSign is another nice notable example. I'm not going to go into all these details, but VeriSign manages the .com and .net for the entire world, the DNS, so perhaps some of the most sensitive and important computers on the planet. But anyway, a really, really wide range. Regardless of what the size of your company is, you can definitely use Ansible. It's designed to be really easy to get started, but also very flexible and capable as you grow and get more complexity. Moving on to the next slide, what are some of the reasons you would look at Ansible instead of some other IT automation solutions, right? So the first one is complexity in defining your environment. So a lot of tooling tends to approach code-level complexity, and I mean, if you've heard of, like, say, Puppet or Chef, those are good tools that started a lot in this industry, but it can take a long time to rearrange and write your content. And what I really wanted to do was enable an environment where a developer or an ops person or a network engineer or whatever can quickly get in and get out and leave time for more strategic projects, research, coding, whatever that was, by spending less time with the tool. And Ansible intends to be really audible and really, really easy to use. So that's important because, I mean, we have users like, for instance, Gawker tells a nice story, that they can give a list of instructions to someone, they can write an Ansible playbook, and then the manager who doesn't know Ansible can read that playbook and say, yes, this is exactly what I wanted you to do. And it's readable by people who don't understand the tool, so it's also very quick for people to get up to speed. It's also an order-based system, so not only can it describe a model of what your systems need to look like, and network devices are included in that, especially with Cumulus looking as much like Linux as it is, because it is Linux, but also very declarative, very order-based bases. So there was kind of a thing we noticed where people would pick a configuration management tool, and then they'd also have to pick a separate deployment tool like Fabric or Capistrano, and then quickly they picked another orchestration tool, and suddenly your software upgrades and rollouts require like learning 6 or 7 things, and we wanted to eliminate that, and we did. And as I mentioned previously, designing it for the multi-tier software as a service or enterprise systems that recognize that you might need to update a web server and then a database server, or things in very specific orders. You might need to deal with rolling updates with load balancers, whatever that is. And being agentless. So we use SSH to communicate with all our remote systems, and that makes it really, really nice for managing Cumulus because obviously it has SSH on it, but you can instantly start managing anything in your fleet with Ansible without installing any software on those remote machines, and you don't have to worry about updating anything. So a new release comes out of Ansible, you can just upgrade one box, you don't have to upgrade thousands of boxes. And that's really, really nice, but it also means that you have increased utilization from all those machines. You have their full power too. You don't have an agent sucking down extra RAM. You don't have an agent providing an additional potential security vector into controlling your box. You only have what you absolutely need, and it's already there by default. Makes it also very, very good in cloud capacities, but all across the board, SSH is what we all know and love, and Ansible is managing machines over SSH. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're just logging in and running shell commands. What it does is it will actually push down the descriptions of what things need to be via Ansible modules, run those modules, and those modules return structured data back in the form of JSON. So Ansible is smart enough to only make the changes it needs to make, and it'll report about the changes it needs to make. So if you were to run a playbook again, it would tell you, I didn't need to make any changes. It also has a dry run mode, so you can see if it would need to make any changes without actually making them. So it can be used to kind of assert compliance of those remote systems. Going on to the next slide, hopefully everybody can see that okay through the webinar software. This is an example Ansible playbook. This isn't doing anything network specific here, but it's just showing you that playbooks in Ansible are a really simple list of tasks. We're using a standard data format here called YAML. YAML is just basically lists of things, but you can see here we're installing a package, and the first a couple packages in the first statement. It can download files, it can run shell commands, it can copy templates to remote systems, work with users and groups, change file modes. Ansible contains a toolbox of like 235 plus modules included in core, which is more than any other automation tool. And that toolbox allows you to more rapidly manage your environment. So you don't have to build a whole bunch of stuff from scratch because Ansible's got all these things built in for you. And it provides a way to manage your infrastructure in a way that's more efficient than just writing bash scripts, because a bash script can be very unreliable because it has to kind of guess what state the system is in. And all that logic is coded into these modules. So there's many years of experience from all the sysadmins that contribute to Ansible that kind of gets codified and stored in what we do here. So moving on to the next slide, just to tell you a little bit about our company. Ansible Inc. is a company behind Ansible that was started about 2 years ago. We want to be a product company and not a services company, and let me explain that. So we do services for people that are interested, but what we want to do is produce a product that makes Ansible really great to use for organizations, and we do that, and also to continue to fund the open source project, which we do to a great extent. But we want to keep away from it becoming a consultancy, right? So we shouldn't have to teach you about Ansible. We'll help you with that, but we want to make you self-sufficient, and that's kind of our philosophy, right? If we're not helping people, we're doing the wrong thing. So we build Ansible Tower, and Ansible Tower, which I'm going to show on the next slide, gives you a lot of really nice features on top of Ansible. There's a graphical user interface, which is really fantastic, role-based access control, so you can say, these admins can only manage these machines, and maybe they can use an SSH key, but they don't actually have access to see what the key is. So if they were to, say, change departments later, they wouldn't be able to access that key anymore. The same can be used for securing cloud credentials. Logging of everything that happens. Some really, really nice features around delegating the ability to run jobs to people that may not be technical enough to use the command line, or are just really busy and want to make sure that it's something's done and then see the status of it for their hosts. It's really the ideal interface for exploring Ansible output. On the next slide here, I have a brief screenshot of Tower. Tower, as Ansible runs, will very quickly give you ways to drill down and see what's going on different hosts. The output comes in real time in our most recent release, so there's WebSocket support for streaming information in, and you can quickly see what's going on. And pin down, like, if there's any hosts that have any problems you need to react to, where are you in your deployment, and all sorts of great things like that. There's also a lot of really nice graphs, dashboards, compliance features, really nice graphical interface, but also a command line interface and a REST API for integrating with any sort of application you want. And that REST API is fully documented through a graphical browser. So it can be very easy to plug into anything that you want to do. Moving on here, Cumulus we really, really like. And I think we have support for managing some other types of network providers, but in my opinion, Cumulus is kind of my favorite for this reason. And that's because it looks like Linux. So a developer or a sysadmin that knows how to configure Linux networking can configure Cumulus, and it just fits like a glove with Ansible because SSH is already there and running on the remote machines, and we can just push down templates and restart network interfaces, and it's so incredibly easy compared to the CLI tools that you might be familiar with on, say, a Cisco box. And that makes it write really, really clean playbooks, and I think we have a demo coming up a little bit later about how that works. And you can actually manage your network and your compute infrastructure all from the same application, whether that's Tower or base Ansible. Tower would be an excellent choice for having a graphical view. Anyway, it's just really, really easy. So the story we're telling here is that Ansible can manage all levels of the stack. So it can provision new cloud nodes or virtual machines in VMware or OpenStack, whatever you have. It can configure the base operating system in configuration management territory. It can deploy your applications, check software out of source control, all those kind of good things. And also handle application lifecycle updates. Working with load balancers to do rolling updates is one of the things we built it for in the beginning. And then also configure your network devices. So you're seeing all of the IT management kind of come together in one specific language instead of 5 or 6 different tools. And it's definitely very powerful in that regard. I think we're going to have some questions at the end, I believe. So next up I'm going to turn it over to Mina, who's going to show you a little bit more about Cumulus and how Ansible fits in a little bit more closely.
Thanks for the support, Michael. We're privileged to have you on this webinar with us to present Ansible. So guys and girls, as you've heard from this session, Cumulus Linux is the industry's first true native Linux operating system for bare metal switches. In terms of networking switches, we have support for both x86 and PowerPC CPU architectures. Just common knowledge, we use Quagga for our routing protocol suite, and as part of our commitment to the open source community, we submit our enhancements and changes upstream on an ongoing basis. And because Cumulus Linux presents a native Linux interface for all applications, it's very easy to customize and build packages that can be leveraged by partners and other customers. So if you look over here, we appear as a platform to enable the various technology segments that are driven by the network as a physical fabric. Hence, as we start building scale-out architectures, network automation is one of the most critical components that a customer can strategize on. For us, Ansible is a lightweight orchestration tool. It doesn't have extensive logic requirements like other tool sets. It also has a very easy revision control on playbooks using Git. But the primary driver for many network administrators bridging the gap into the DevOps world, it's the simplicity of the descriptive language. Especially as a CCIE or a CLI expert, you may not be very proficient on the Linux side of things. And Ansible could be that great transition tool for you, as the DSL is really very easy to adapt. So let's dive into a few sample scenarios of how you can leverage Cumulus Linux and Ansible together. And later, I shall spend a few minutes doing a quick live demo using our Cumulus Workbench setup. So when you consider all the modern data center challenges, rapid network provisioning, configuration of nodes as customers scale to meet business growth, or automating just your routine tasks, these become very crucial. Ansible modules can act on all or just a few switches at once. And these modules are open source and they're available on GitHub. And unlike most tool sets, all these supported modules are actually available when Ansible is installed. So you can learn a lot more about the module by just executing the Ansible CLI on it. And here, the host running Ansible could be a Cumulus Linux running on a bare metal switch or on a VM. So the first example we're going to dive into is the rapid network provisioning here. So time to do greenfield deployments can be drastically reduced down from weeks and days to minutes and seconds. And Ansible already has done dozens of modules in the data center for hosts. So why wouldn't you bring up your leaves or even your spines with Ansible at the same time and also use all the zero-touch provisioning script that Cumulus Linux has underneath? So by doing that, you can actually reduce your config errors by using the same automation in a repeatable manner rather than manually typing into a CLI. So you can see in the recap shot here how the data is shown in terms of the status of the leaf and the spine switches. Now, another common scenario would be when a switch has a hardware problem, such as a bad fan or a power supply. Ansible can be used so that the bad switch can simply be ripped out, replaced, and re-provisioned. Now, this allows us for all the troubleshooting of the bad switch to happen off the live network without any critical downtime. Now, as modern data center switches are following this trend of industry standard bare metal hardware, you can actually stock a lot of these additional switches, which is typically what customers are doing now, because the economics of these are so compelling. Now, in the second snapshot here, you see the notification of just the failed hardware. Now, another typical use case that you would like to see is configuration management. Now, you have a global team with your staff. You're dispersed all across multiple data centers. As a supervisor, you want to know what files have been changed. So yeah, not only can you use Ansible for provisioning, but now it can keep track of what configurations have been touched, so you can be notified on the edits and changes that have occurred. So in terms of the third snapshot here, you look at just the spine switch that has changed. And you can look at this at the Etsy network interfaces in terms of how you use it. Now, one of the last scenarios we're going to touch here is gracefully changing the network. Now, traffic is flowing from west to east, from leaf 3 to leaf 7, and it has 3 equal cost paths. What if now your spine 2 needs to be upgraded, replaced, etc.? Why don't we let Ansible do the hard lifting for us? Now, if you look here, the playbook, the way it's defined, you configure the route, you make the desired changes in OSPF for us to isolate spine 2, and then you reroute the traffic so that it's ready for decommissioning. Now, playbooks at an advanced level can sequence pretty much multi-tier rollouts involving rolling updates. It can delegate actions to other hosts. It can interact with monitoring servers and even load balancers along the way. So finally, that being done, you look at the next one, and you see the red links are no longer being used, and we see the task completed here. So before we jump into the demo, I want to provide you some details on what's available in terms of resources. We have a remote Cumulus workbench that gives you access to play with Cumulus Linux and try out some Ansible playbooks. We also have all the sample configuration for this has been open sourced in GitHub, so you can download and play with it and kind of leverage it for how you want to write and create new playbooks. We have several knowledge-based articles. We have user guides in order to help you automate your network. And we also will have a centralized repository of all these Ansible-specific assets on a dedicated Ansible landing page shortly in the next couple of weeks. And with that, let me look at the demo topology. And looks like we might have a poll question. So I will let you guys enter the quick poll question while I walk you through our demo topology. So the question, certainly, would you be interested in trying Cumulus Linux and Ansible in our Cumulus workbench setup that's remotely set up? So go ahead and take that poll while I describe the topology here. So we have 2 leaf switches and 2 spine switches. And what we have here is a jump server. So there are no hosts attached, so no servers attached to these 4 switches. There are several switch scenarios in our Cumulus workbench. We have a 1 switch, 2 switch, or 2 leaf, 2 spine switch. And based on all the overlay integration and VXLAN, we also have a 2 leaf, 2 spine switch where the switches are actually Trident 2. So we have different environments, and based on the requirements of the customers or partners, we usually provide them select access for a limited period of time, depending on how familiar they want to get. So with that, let's move on to a quick demo. I'm going to share my desktop here. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. And what I've done here already in the interest of time is I've logged into one of our 2 leaf, 2 spine workbench. I've accepted the EULA, which kind of walks you through the agreement. I've done an apt-get update just to make sure that I'm not spending cycles while installing all the latest packages. So the latest packages are there. And now I'm going to basically quickly ping all the 4 hosts and see if they're alive. And hopefully that's all green. Great. So now that they're alive and we've validated that using the zero-touch provisioning script that we installed for Cumulus Linux, let me run the playbook, the YAML file that I talked about, as well as Michael had mentioned earlier. So here you have Ansible playbook, and it's a 2-spine 2-leaf, as you see, and it's specifically what we're showing here is OSPF unnumbered. And once you run the YAML file, again, let me look. Why is the desktop not sharing? Here we go. Playbooks, so just for people, they're a bundled set of tasks and supporting structure to make sure stuff happens. And the site YAML file, this is a root configuration file. It tells us a bunch of switches, what roles to run. And then in this case, we're creating 2 users, a rocket and a turtle. You're creating a message of the day. You're performing all the steps necessary to install the Cumulus Linux license. You're ensuring that switch D restarts. You're configuring Quagga with OSPF turned on. You're restarting all the services with the new configurations. And then now we're checking, okay, are the leaf switches up or the spine switches up? And then it kind of walks you through. So as a network administrator or even a supervisor, it's great for you to kind of run this playbook and then check, and it's sort of this validation as you go through the entire process. Oh, there you go. So you're like, okay, how many switches did I have? 2 leaf, 2 spine, and they're all up. Now what you can do is, let's try just logging into one of the switches. You can just SSH into one of the switches and look at PTM, which is our prescriptive topology manager. It maps out all of the port connectivity. Very useful tool. So you can verify PTM, which is sort of your cabling verification. And then you can also look at your LDP neighbors. So let's do that. And once you see the neighbors, it shows you all the connectivity. Now let's come back to the main workbench. And you can pretty much run, I'm going to show a couple of sample commands to make it easier. So for example, if we did PTM cuddle for all the hosts. So if you do that for all the hosts, you see leaf 1, leaf 2, spine 1, spine 2. It shows all of the connectivity as passed. It's kind of a good validation prior to checking out the OSPF neighbors. Now if you go in and you check for your OSPF neighbor, and it will give you all of the full OSPF connectivity for leaf 1, leaf 2, spine 1, spine 2. Now, one more last command I would run, just to give you a quick idea, is let's do, say, IP route show. As I do IP route show, Ansible is very easy, as you can see. Now let's scroll up. You look through. You have all of your local remote links, leaf 1, spine 1, leaf 2, and then spine 2. You see your next hop details and so forth. So again, in the interest of time, I know we have a lot of questions coming up in the pop-up window as well. We will certainly dive into a lot of technical details in a longer session for follow-ups. Our Cumulus Workbench is absolutely available for you to try out. We have several of these playbooks as sample, so eagerly looking forward to many of you getting very familiar with Cumulus Linux and Ansible. So with that, thanks for your patience. Hopefully this at least gave you kind of a primer and it was useful, and I'll hand it over to Carrie for some Q&A.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Mina. A lot of great questions coming in. First question, Michael, I believe this question is for you. Server automation is well known. How do you see network automation with Ansible grow?
Sure. So I mean, I think there's I kind of alluded to some of that earlier. There's a big trend on trying to automate network stuff more efficiently. So I know I've worked in places in the past where you had to have a network guy on the phone and to manually potentially respond to any request the development team would have, and that's a fantastic thing to have that expertise available. But the idea of having to log on to every single box, make a big change in a large topology is obviously where the challenge lies, right? So there's a lot of people trying to look to automation tools to help roll out those changes faster, and I think you're going to see increasingly more of that up the chain. Whereas the infrastructure as code ideas are, we're evolving over the past, 5 or 7 years, and now we're making a very good case for infrastructure can be divided as data, but making sure that all the network stuff gets to be managed in the same way as computers. And Cumulus, I think, is a fantastic fit in that regard because it looks just like Linux. I mean, you're seeing a real shell prompt, you're seeing real config files. So it fits itself very, very naturally to those existing automation tools.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Another question. How do you see customers liking the integration story of Ansible and Cumulus Linux?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very strong fit. So I was at a Triangle DevOps meetup the other day where we were doing a demo and watching a bunch of people's mouths kind of drop when they're like, hey, I've configured this whole spine leaf topology in about 15 seconds, and then I've intentionally introduced an error, and I've undone that error in another 15 seconds. And it's just really, really nice to see how quickly you can roll out change now and how simple it is and how quickly we can expose networking to even groups that were less familiar. So I think that's a very nice thing that they're doing. And then because of there's already SSH and a management port in Linux, you can get going and instantly manage that fleet without any setup. So the learning curve is just so incredibly small.
Great. So we have a question coming in. Can you mess about with the Cumulus stuff without physical hardware?
Michael, I can take that one.
Sure.
So I believe the person's asking if he can just play around with Cumulus without having to do any initial investment with the physical hardware. And that's exactly why we have the Cumulus Workbench. There's no initial investment. You get 2-day access, a remote login, and you and several members of your team can jump on, play with Cumulus Linux, get familiar with it. And at the same time, you're also using Ansible if you want. You have a playbook. The playbooks are online. I saw another question come up. Are these sample Cumulus playbooks online available? They're available. They're on our website. I can certainly have those links posted here for folks who are unable to find it easily. And Carrie will distribute that to the rest of the audience over here. But we have the links, we have the playbooks, and the configurations are all also open sourced on GitHub, as I mentioned earlier. And you can certainly get comfortable before making that initial buy for the physical hardware.
Great. Thanks, Mina. How should a customer decide on network automation tools when there are so many out there?
Oh, yeah. So that's a good question, right? So obviously we would like you to try them all and start with Ansible because you're going alphabetically. No, it really matters what fits your team, right? So how does your team think and how do they want to operate? To us, I think it's not just so much about learning curve, but also the day-to-day overhead of using a particular tool that matters. So we want to choose something that's really, really simple and obviously find something that works with your hardware and that you're comfortable with. I think where Ansible fits in really nicely because it's just using SSH is you don't have to make any commitment to installing anything in your network topology. So you can try out Ansible, and if you decide you don't like it, you can stop using it tomorrow, and there's nothing to clean up. But yeah, definitely look around, do your homework. A lot of the local DevOps groups are very good resources for learning about automation tooling. If you're interested in Ansible, if you go to docs.ansible.com, you can kind of dig in and get started. I definitely recommend looking at the Cumulus playbooks to just see how close they are to just standard systems. It's very, very easy to get rolling. But docs.ansible.com is a good tutorial if you want to start learning Ansible things.
Great. Another question. Michael, how do you handle or limit your company liability from possible network disruption outages when something goes wrong with a bulk config change in the network?
Wow, that's a really good question. Obviously, with any of the automation tools, you are increasing your efficiency, but you're also increasing to a degree your chance to shoot yourself in the foot. One of the things that we highly recommend for people, even in classical server management, is the idea of a stage environment that closely models production. And when you have a stage environment and you can try stuff out in production, you can, that's very, very close to production. I mean, running in the same data center, right? Same kind of thing. You can easily, more quickly understand what goes wrong. But the other nice thing is that your automation software allows you to recover from those problems faster. So if you ever do get into a problem scenario, it's easy to update more configuration stuff. Now, the liability is a fancy word. It seems to imply lawyers and customers and contracts, and I'm definitely not the person to ask about those particular things, but I recommend a good test environment. I also recommend committing all your automation content to a repository and encouraging peer review, right? So more eyes on things are good, and the idea that you manage your automation configuration like a software project is increasingly a good thing because you have a record of what's all that's out there, what's changed, and what goes on.
Great, thanks. Another question, is Cumulus available as a VM for testing?
So I think it goes back to our Workbench. Today, we're still showcasing it to our Workbench for people to test. We are, however, working on a training VM, but in terms of a lot of the partner integration for them to, say, get into the Broadcom shell, or if they have to do any, build any apps on top, there is a dependency on the physical hardware because of switching ASICs. So we tend to have a flavor of both PowerPC switches as well as x86 switches from a variety of ODM vendors, and make sure that we have that pool of hardware for folks to kind of test it out. But if you just want to, play around with the VM, you can go and play with just a Debian VM because we are based on Debian VZ. So it'll at least give you a flavor of kind of how our Linux distribution looks like.
Great, thanks. And last question, is there any equivalent from non-open source, for example, Cisco, et cetera?
So I think he's talking about our ability to manage other vendors in Ansible. And yes, there are modules for various other things, such as Arista and Juniper as well. Like I said, we really like the ability to manage Cumulus because you can just drop in files. I don't know about exactly the open source question. Obviously, Cumulus has hardware involved and some software that's not open source. So maybe I didn't completely understand the nature of that question. We do manage other devices, but I think Cumulus has the most seamless automation experience, and it's definitely very, very nice to automate. It's like any developer who knows what a config file looks like for networking can just write a template and be going from scratch, and they don't need to do anything to prep their hardware. Like, for instance, for Cisco hardware, I think you have to do something to like turn on SSH, right? But it just works out of the box, and that's a really, really nice thing with Ansible and Cumulus together.
Great. Great. Thanks, Mina. Thanks, Michael. We are now out of time. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. We hope you found this presentation about network and automation with Ansible and Cumulus useful. We'd love to have you tune into our next webinar, September 17th, where we'll discuss configuration and routing of class networks, or you can join us for Coffee with Cumulus each Thursday morning for a product overview and introduction to Cumulus Linux. Details are on our website, cumulusnetworks.com/webinars. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks for joining, everyone.